everyone, your 310 coach Katie is here. Today I'm really excited to go over, is dairy scary? And I'm curious if you could please comment below. This is a dairy-free company, this 310 Nutrition, and I'm really curious if any of you have any reasons why you're choosing a plant-based protein powder rather than a whey protein powder. Maybe some of you are lactose intolerant, or you've heard before that dairy products are not good for you. Maybe it's an environmental choice. If you have any comments around that, I'm so curious, and I would love to hear below if you avoid dairy in general or not. And I do have a little PowerPoint to go along with this. If that could be brought up now, that would be awesome. But basically, thank you so much. Yeah, is dairy scary? So today, and then going to the next slide, I'm going to be going over. Yeah, great topic. Thank you, Claudia. I think that this is something, at least for me as a dietitian, going through school, it's recommended 3 cups of milk a day. Have your cup of milk with every meal, making sure that you're getting enough calcium, enough protein. And I was actually plant-based before going into college. And I remember thinking that this was absurd, right? Looking at all of the, when it comes to an environmental impact, all of the water, all of the food, all of the production that gets fed to the dairy cows. And then, of course, the greenhouse gas emissions. But the ethical standpoint, good morning, Ish. Good morning, Maria. Ethical standpoint, environmental standpoint aside, I'm really just going to be talking about the nutrition behind dairy products. And again, throughout, if you do have any comments or questions, I love to see if you're engaged on here and what comments you have. So going over milk's macronutrients, if you've ever counted your macros, those are your carbs, proteins, and fats, and seeing the makeup of different dairy products, as well as calcium and other nutrients that are in dairy, and a Q&A, and I am going to be touching on other sources of these nutrients as well. Okay, so what is the milk sugar, the carbohydrate in milk and dairy products? A lot of people don't realize this. When they think of milk, it's actually full of sugar, and that sugar is in the form of lactose, which experts estimate that about 68% of the world's population, when it comes to especially an adult population, which adults probably more of this percentage, are lactose intolerant. Do you or anyone you know have lactose intolerance? I know personally, undiagnosed, but having a lot of milk, a lot of cheese would definitely cause me indigestion, gas, bloating. And on top of that, I used to suffer with acne. Without a doubt, a lot of my patients and my clients, when removing dairy products, their acne clears up, their indigestion clears up, and even I used to have athletic-induced asthma. So these things, these symptoms subsiding after giving up dairy products, really, really interesting. Is anybody in here lactose intolerant, or were you aware that milk is actually has a lot of sugar? Maria says, oh yeah, my brother and I are lactose intolerant. Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people, 68%, that's over 2/3, that's over 2 out of 3 people. So odds are a lot of you watching this are lactose intolerant for sure. And then the next macronutrient that I want to touch on in milk is protein. So not all protein is created equal. You've probably heard that you need a complete protein if you want to build muscle and be healthy. And what are the most complete proteins? When I was in food science, when I was in school, I learned that egg protein, dairy protein, meat protein are the most complete proteins, which basically means that they're most readily absorbed. They're the highest biologic value proteins, especially eggs. You know, you always are going to see bodybuilders loving on their eggs because it's such a complete protein that it stimulates the liver to release what's called insulin growth factor. And as adults, when we're stimulating release of growth factor with concentrated complete proteins, this growth factor can signal growth of unwanted cells like tumors and cancer cells, especially in an environment where we're really taking in a lot of processed foods, we're really stressed out, maybe we're exposed to a lot of toxins. The dose does make the poison. I don't want to say that all dairy and all milk is necessarily bad or harmful. If we're overeating anything, it's going to be harmful. And with this milk protein, this complete protein, it has been shown to significantly really stimulate a growth factor release. So protein from all dairy products combined, that means yogurt, whole milk, skim milk, different types of cheeses, ricotta cheese, hard cheeses, all different dairy products combined, according to this study that was published just last year in 2021, was associated with much higher insulin-like growth factor concentrations than people who didn't have that much protein from dairy products. Intake of protein from milk and yogurt was strongly associated, exactly, with circulating insulin-like growth factor. And what's interesting about this study, just at the very beginning of it, going over the background of why they're even doing this research, circulating insulin-like growth factor is associated with the risk of several cancers. Dietary protein intake, particularly dairy protein, may increase circulating insulin-like growth factor. So, and also thinking about going back to what is sugar? What is carbohydrate, especially in the form of lactose? And when you're drinking sugar, and there's no fiber in there. So I know we've talked a lot previously about making sure we're getting in a good amount of fiber. And I talked about blood sugar hacks, and we would much rather eat an orange or an apple instead of drinking apple juice, right? Because apple juice doesn't have any fiber to slow down a blood sugar spike. When we're drinking milk, there's no fiber in there, right? We're drinking that lactose sugar that's pretty quickly absorbed and can lead to an insulin-like growth factor spike simply from the lactose sugar in there. That can also lead to growth factor. This is a cascade of a reaction that's leading to signal growth, right? When we're eating. Next slide says, new study associates intake of dairy milk with greater breast cancer risk. And I think a lot of you out there are mostly women. And maybe comment below if you or anyone you know has been diagnosed with breast cancer. Breast cancer is one of the top diagnosed cancers. And when it comes to, yay, I'm so glad that you're enjoying this. When it comes to any sort of exogenous source of hormones on top of the insulin-like growth factor and the lactose, this can really exacerbate estrogen and hormone-related cancers like breast cancer, endometrial cancer, even issues like PCOS and hormone issues like acne, as well as prostate cancer. There's a lot of correlation and a lot of research out there around prostate cancer, especially with whole milk and different types of dairy products. But with this, I did take some notes I wanted to share with you from this particular Loma Linda University article. Intake of dairy milk is associated with a greater risk of breast cancer in women, according to this new study from Loma Linda University. Dairy, soy, and risk of breast cancer. So those confounded milks, basically, this is saying that published in the International Journal of Epidemiology, found that even relatively moderate amounts of dairy consumption can increase women's risk of breast cancer up to 80%, depending on the amount consumed. The first author of the paper, Gary Fraser, PhD, said that the observational study, here I wanted to write, gives quote unquote fairly strong evidence that either dairy milk or some other factor closely related to drinking dairy milk is a cause of breast cancer in women. Consuming as little as a quarter to a third of a cup of dairy milk per day was associated with an increase of breast cancer of 30%, Fraser said. By drinking up to 1 cup per day, the associated risk went up to 50%, and for those drinking 2 to 3 cups per day, the risk increased further from 70 to 80%, increasing your risk of breast cancer. So although milk can be beneficial, of course, there's nutrients in these different dairy products. However, there may be more beneficial alternatives when it comes to getting in our calcium and our protein that may not necessarily be associated with an increase of cancer risk. And yeah, this was just published a couple years ago, February 2020. So going on to the next slide, milk fat, saturated fat. And Saturated fat, not just like not all proteins are created equal. Like a protein from chickpeas is going to perform a lot differently in our body than the protein from dairy milk. Saturated fat from coconut and different types of unsaturated fats like olive oil, these are going to do much different things in our body than the saturated fat from an animal product. So saturated fat from milk and meat has really been significantly associated with an increase of inflammation and increased risk of heart disease. And yeah, it's just directly correlated with an increase of cholesterol in the bloodstream, which leads to atherosclerosis, or a buildup of plaque in our blood vessels, which leads to a heart attack and heart disease. And as I mentioned before, the dose does make the poison. A little bit of animal products, a little bit of cheese, a little bit of butter here and there, not what I'm concerned about. We do want to make sure that we're eating 2 to 3 cups of vegetables every day, getting in those berries and soluble fibers and healthy fats, especially if we are going to be taking in some milk fat here and there. And going on to the next slide, just wanted to point out, I actually had updated this. I wonder if it didn't. I had another couple of slides associated with this. Here, let me actually, if you want to go back to the butter slide. Yeah, I'm sorry my slides didn't update, I guess, when I sent them over. But there's a Harvard study that's, it was just published. I can't see exactly from my slide when it was published, but it's got to be within the last couple of years, that says study sheds light on disease risk. And looking at colleges like Loma Linda and Harvard, these seem to be really unbiased sources. Study sheds light on the butter on disease risk. And basically it said dairy fat replaced with the same number of calories from vegetable fat or polyunsaturated fat, risk of heart disease dropped by 10% and 24% respectively. So vegetable fat versus polyunsaturated fat. Vegetable fat could be monounsaturated fat. There's a lot of different types of plant fats. And the polyunsaturated fats, those are your omega-3s. Those are your essential fatty acids. Those are the ones that could also come from fish. That's why everybody, like all my professors, would always say, make sure you're taking fish oil every single day. If you don't want to get heart disease, you got to take in your polyunsaturated fats. So replacing the same number of calories that you would take in with dairy products, replace that with healthier sources of fat from vegetables or polyunsaturated fats, the risk of cardiovascular disease dropped up to 24%. Which is amazing. Replacing the same number of calories from dairy fat with healthful carbohydrates from whole grains associated with a 28% lower risk of cardiovascular disease or heart disease. So eating more whole grains, eating more foods that are a source of fiber, a source of antioxidants, it's going to be even more health promoting when it comes to preventing heart disease. Dairy fat replaced. Thank you for putting this in the comments. Yes, exactly. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone's clear that it really does make a big difference to transition to healthier sources of fat and different options if we're wanting to decrease our chronic disease risk. Yay. And then moving on, I think it's just really fascinating looking at the different breakdown of nutrients. So getting educated about what different nutrients are in milk. Probably the biggest one is calcium that people think of when it comes to why do we need milk? What is in milk? Of course, if it's a higher fat, so 2% versus 1%, the whole milk or the 2% milk is going to have more calories because it has more fat. That's a pretty high source of protein, right? 8 grams of protein in just 1 cup. And the calcium is 29% or 31%. Noticing that there's not much at all when it comes to vitamin A, vitamin C, or iron, which are nutrients of concern in an American population. A lot of people are not getting enough antioxidant vitamins like vitamin C, vitamin A, and women need twice as much iron than men do, especially women who exercise, especially menstruating women. So when it comes to getting in iron and vitamin C, very important for recovery, very important for long-term health. And of course, you can also look here, getting in cholesterol underneath the total fat. We can see that the majority of this fat is saturated fat. It's interesting. It's almost all saturated fat when it comes to the type of fat. And looking at the cholesterol, there's no cholesterol necessary in our diets. Our livers are really, really good at producing all of the cholesterol we need simply from a healthy fat backbone. So if we're taking in enough nuts, seeds, avocado, olives, olive oil, of course, we're going to be creating all of the cholesterol we need. And anytime we take in cholesterol from an outside source, like from cheese, meat, dairy, that is like a little overboard. And it really does exacerbate inflammation, especially if we already have some inflammation going on, especially if we're not taking in enough vegetables or antioxidants. So that's something to keep in mind. Sodium doesn't necessarily look like an issue here. Total carbohydrate. The only issue with the total carbohydrate is, as I mentioned before, when it comes to choosing carbohydrate products, we want to make sure that there is fiber in our source of carbohydrate, and there's zero fiber. There's zero fiber in these products, okay? So moving on to the next slide, comparing probably the healthiest, most people think, right, that the healthiest option for dairy milk would be the skim milk, the fat-free milk. And I'm comparing that with a cup of collard greens. So a cup of cooked collard greens, which collard greens grow like crazy, right? I actually live on a farm, and collard greens they grow all year round. They survive in the winter. Collard greens are so easy to grow, and they just keep growing and growing and growing. You can keep harvesting collard greens and it'll just keep growing. Like, it's not like with broccoli or something where you harvest the broccoli and the plant dies. So collard greens, I feel like we're meant to eat a lot of them. And looking at the nutrition, if you look at the very bottom, oh my gosh, you've got so much vitamin A and vitamin C. And yeah, 10% of your need for iron for the day when it comes to getting in those greens, like, that's fantastic. And looking at the calcium, it's pretty much the same. Collard greens are an amazing source of calcium. Sure, there's a little bit less protein in a cup of collard greens than in a cup of skim milk, but that may be a good thing. When we're taking in too much protein, especially animal protein, that does exacerbate growth factor increase, which could exacerbate cancer growth. As grown adults, we want to make sure we're taking in the majority of our protein after a workout, so it goes to stimulate growth of muscles and not growth of any cancer or any tumors like that. We don't just want to be all the time taking in way too much protein. Looking at the sugars, of course, the sugars are much lower in the collard greens, and the fiber is much higher in the collard greens. I did a webinar yesterday going over autoimmune diseases and nutrition, and basically the whole talk was about leaky gut and intestinal dysbiosis. Thank you. I'm so glad to hear you're enjoying this talk. So when it comes to intestinal dysbiosis and leaky gut, that truly is the root of a lot of autoimmune conditions. And there's over 100 autoimmune conditions that are even undiagnosed because they're just like random symptoms. A lot of people are like, I'm having this symptom, I don't know what's going on. Odds are it has to do with the microbiota in your gut. And most people are not taking in enough fiber. So how amazing that this collard greens has lots of calcium and lots of fiber. Definitely less sodium, which most people are trying to decrease their intake of sodium. And the calories, like everything, collard greens, eat your greens, people. Eat your greens. But collard greens are not the only plant-based source of calcium. There's great calcium in lots of vegetables like okra, broccoli, kale, even figs. If you like fresh figs, I don't think they're in season right now, but those are actually a surprisingly great source of calcium. If you like tahini, I love a good lemon tahini dressing on a kale salad. So yummy. Maybe with some hemp seeds on there, getting those omega-3s and hemp seeds. Lots of different types of seeds are a really, really great source of calcium. Like tahini is sesame seed paste, and those sesame seeds are a great source of calcium. What else is a good source of calcium? And of course, I didn't even mention almond milk, oat milk, soy milk. There's so many different types of milk and replacements for dairy products right now. I went plant-based January 1st, 2011, and there was barely any options. There was no vegan ice cream. There was no oat milk. There was a lot of, I think the only option really was maybe a soy milk and an almond milk and a rice milk. But when it comes to choosing your plant-based milks, look for the added sugars. Just like we did here today, we really don't want to be taking in sources of sugar without that fiber content, okay? So better milks out there would probably be your almond milks. I love soy milk because it is a great source of protein. Just make sure it's unsweetened. And I know soy gets a bad reputation sometimes, but when it comes to outside sources of estrogen, soy has actually been shown to help prevent and release excess estrogen in the body. So soy acts more like an adaptogen to help. If you really are low in estrogen, sometimes it can help with that. And if you have too much estrogen in your body, if you're having like acne, endometriosis, these things, even breast cancer, studies have shown across the board that people who, especially after having breast cancer, who are at risk of breast cancer, people who eat soy are much less likely to have a recurrence of these estrogen related cancers, which is fascinating, right? Because they do contain phytoestrogens. Why does soy get such negative reviews? I feel the same way, right? It's just an innocent little bean, you know? Like in Japan, they eat lots of edamame and lots of tofu. I have a couple of answers for this. The first thing that comes to my mind is when anything is mass produced and overproduced, like kind of similarly to how corn, I feel like, is getting a negative reputation right now because corn is really genetically modified and overproduced, and they're using corn to feed all the livestock and all of the people in the world, and they're using like high fructose corn syrup, and corn is in absolutely everything, even corn and soy based inks, right? They're using these crops as a lot more than just feeding people. So soy, a lot of it has become genetically modified, and it's been overproduced, and I think to the point of it being not good for us anymore. For sure, there's a lot that we don't see when it comes to the politics behind the dairy industry and them wanting to stay in business. I know the dairy industry is one of the most powerful industries, and they support a lot of research that supports dairy being good and soy being bad. Like often when I see a research study, at the bottom of the study, like it'll say like meat is good for you or something, and at the bottom of the study it'll say the Beef and Cattle Association. You know, that does happen a lot when it comes to any negative research around soy and positive research around dairy. If you really look at who's funding the study, it's often from the Dairy Council, Dairy Association, Dairy something, that supports this research around soy being bad, simply because soy, it's probably the one plant-based milk that actually has a comparable amount of protein, but it has so many more antioxidants, and it's so much better across the board and for so many other reasons. And then there was one more thing I was going to say around why soy might be, why it might get such negative reviews, kind of similar to why soy gets negative reviews from being overproduced and genetically modified. Where people are really benefiting from soy, where I'm saying, okay, yeah, in Japan, people don't have endometriosis and breast cancer. In places where they eat the most soy products, they're actually much healthier and have less chronic disease. But they're not eating, they're not eating soy chorizo and soy-based sausage and soy milk and soy. Like there's a lot of packaged processed foods that even I, as a plant-based individual, I'm not going to recommend necessarily. Like I think that these things are fun here and there, and I think it is better environmentally and a lot of other ethical reasons, but it's not necessarily a health food to have your soy-based burgers and lots of artificial colors and flavors mixed in with those soy-based things all the time. If you're going plant-based and all of a sudden you're eating, 20 servings of processed soy products, that's not necessarily healthy. Does that make sense? That's a great question, and I feel like I should do another a live just talking about soy and the differences, because edamame and tempeh and tofu, especially if it's organic, is going to be a lot better than having these random soy products. So buy your soy organic. Do you get enough omega if you eat fish twice a week? That's a great question. You don't even have to eat fish twice a week. A lot of people get plenty of omegas eating 2 to 3, or I would say maybe 2 to 4, depending on how tall you are and how much you work out. 2 to 4 tablespoons every day of ground flax seeds or soaked chia seeds or hemp seeds or walnuts, those 4 sources. I'm going to do it live on this. Getting enough omegas, you don't need to eat fish. And I do recommend an algae-derived omega supplement, especially if you work out. Algae-derived omega, that means you're getting it from the source that the fish get their DHA and EPA. They get it from the algae. When it comes to fish, please don't overeat fish. I do have patients with mercury poisoning, and it's really scary and it's really sad. My patients who love sushi and think that sushi is a really great healthy option. The acronym that I use where I work, it's called SMASH. So that's your low mercury wild caught smash fish, sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, herring. 4 ounces twice a week. That's all you need. Maybe 2 to 3 times a week if you're tall, if you're really working out a lot, maybe 3 times a week. But yes, you're getting plenty of omegas if you just eat 4 ounces twice a week of fish. That's a great question. Flax seeds for omega, super convenient. Yeah, and the thing with flax though, make sure it's ground. If you're eating whole flax seeds on top of your peanut butter toast, those whole flax seeds are going to act as fantastic fiber and come out the other end. You're not going to absorb the omega-3s unless the flax seeds are ground, okay? So grind your flax seeds, soak your chia seeds. Hemp seeds are my favorite because those get absorbed right away and they're full of so many minerals and protein and great omega-3s in hemp seeds as well. All right, that's just about it. Do we have a watch to win winner of the day here today? Today's winner is Barbara. Barbara, congratulations. Thank you so much for being here. Be on the lookout for a message from someone on the 310 team. Send me all of your questions in the comment box if you have any further suggestions for our next live. I would love to go over soy and omegas, maybe in a future one. And everybody, happy Halloween. Be sure to tune in to this Sunday, Self-Care Sunday. I'm going to be going over mindset around not feeling guilty and staying true to our goals during the holiday season and during Halloween. It's going to be a great mindset one on Sunday. Looking forward to it. Have a great day.